true resting in the day-to-day, and we'll get into the how here, I think it requires us to invite God into every area of our lives, not just our rest. And it has to start there, because otherwise we will shame ourselves and we will get ourselves back on the treadmill of the to-do list, and we'll just get irritated and frustrated. And that irritation and frustration will consistently come out on our kids or our spouse, because it's an offense against us that we didn't get our quiet time, that we didn't get our prayer time, that I didn't get space with God. And I think space with God happens even when I'm in relationship with people.
You are listening to the Famous at Home podcast with Dr. Josh and Christy Straub.
Because when it's all said and done, we all want to know that we were famous at home. Welcome back to the Famous at Home podcast. We're talking about rest today. Before we do, here is a word from our sponsors. Hey everybody, Josh Straub here with Famous at Home. We want to introduce you to the Famous at Home Starter Bundle. This is something we created just for you. All you have to do is click the button to sign up to receive our workbook, 7 Decisions to Putting Your Family Center Stage. You'll also get a feelings chart handout that you can implement with your kids and with your spouse. And you'll also receive the 100 Commonly Held Values worksheet so that you can sit down with your family and discuss the values that you want to set as a family that will provide vision for how and you want to lead your family in the direction that you're going to head in. So you get those 3 things right away as soon as you sign up. In addition to that, we will send to you our top podcast episodes on marriage, parenting, and family, the most listened to and the most foundational for developing emotional connection with your loved ones. You'll also receive past newsletters, our exclusive weekly newsletter. You'll be enrolled to receive that on an ongoing basis. These are real-time newsletters of what's happening in our lives and what we're doing and implementing to be famous at home that we want to give to you, just weekly nuggets to keep us equipped every single week. And then you'll also receive the weekly podcast episodes as well. This starter bundle is all free. We want to give it to you. Just click the link to sign up. All right, Christy, we're talking, it's spring break time for a lot of people. And I don't know if you've been able to, there's a good chance because this week, the week that we're recording, a lot of you have already been on spring break. I think spring break happens at the end of February to like middle of March. We're releasing this probably when you're on your way back. We still haven't gone yet, so we're getting ready to do that. But I think I love looking forward to spring break. I think this 1 week in this beginning part of the year, coming out of January and February, it's so busy. I mean, there's a lot always happening. But in this process, we want to talk today about when you can't rest. And I'm talking about, so today we're going to do a 2-part series here, because I think rest is so critically important. I was speaking a couple weeks ago in California, and one of the things I was talking about was rest and holding a Sabbath. And I probably had more questions about how we did a Q&A session. And I think I got more questions about how we rest as a family, especially with sports and activities and birthday parties and all these things, more than any other question that I got. And so we want to talk about it today from the standpoint of scheduling. What does our day-to-day look like, especially with kids, and how chaotic that can be. And then next week, we want to talk about rest in relation to what happens when you get the ability to rest, but you can't settle yourself down. You can't actually sit still. So that's kind of what's coming over the next 2 weeks. As we talk about that, one of the things I would love to just introduce before we even get started on rest is we would love for you to rest by getting the 10 days of the Easter story, because Palm Sunday is coming up in just a few weeks, and so is Easter. And it's a great opportunity to rest for a few minutes a day, to go through the 10 days of the Easter story starting on Palm Sunday with your kids, and for you as a parent as well to enter into the feelings of Holy Week, and helping our kids navigate their own feelings in their day-to-day lives, but also being able to use it as an opportunity for them to enter into the story of Holy Week and see what it is that other characters or people that during that season of life, during 2,000 years ago, were feeling, Jesus's followers were feeling, and even the Pharisees, people who didn't follow him necessarily, what they were feeling leading up into his death and resurrection. And so we'd love for you to check that out. I also just want to briefly mention, if you are looking for any type of coaching, we are receiving new clients as well. You can check out famousathome.com for that, especially as it relates to rest, or if you're in a season where, I know I'm doing a lot of talking here at the beginning, but I wanted to cover some of those things. I think
you're doing great. I haven't even felt the need to say anything.
Let me tell you where I genuinely believe, I told Christy this before we even started this episode, I genuinely believe I have probably one of the most, and again, I'm getting there. I'm certainly not there, but I'm getting there. Solid day-to-day daily rhythms as it relates to a rule of life, as it relates to what I'm implementing in relation to prayer, in relation to, and I would say that if I had one area I really want to grow in more, it's more of a listening prayer where I'm just sitting with God and listening to him. I do a lot of talking in my prayers, which I don't necessarily think that is wrong. I just think that, I think a lot of times it depends on what type of talking we're doing, whether we are just crying out to God as a consumer, like it's like, okay, God, I need this, I need that, I need this, I need that, I need this, right? And if that's the majority of our prayers, I think God just wants to spend time with us, and he just wants to sit with us, and he wants to speak to us. And I think if there's an area of my growth that I could happen in, it could be just do more listening prayer. But I genuinely believe, I mean, I have wiped my phone. I have more space for writing. As those of you who follow our email list, which we would highly encourage you to subscribe to, the newsletter is a great opportunity for that. We'd love for you to check that out. I have more writing space, and I feel like I have more space. However, I still feel like I'm not fully restful in the day-to-day the way that I want to be. In fact, I got this zero affiliate money for this, but I'm going to say it anyway, just because I don't need to get affiliate money for it. I'm just telling you something that I have, this is an actual thing that I'm doing. I have no relationship with these guys whatsoever, but I got what's called the Monk Manual a couple weeks back, and I've been trying it out. And it's basically a planner, a daily, monthly, and weekly planner. But in that planner, you're writing down, like a gratitude journal, you're writing down what you're grateful for, things you're looking forward to. And then you reflect at the end of each day. What were the highlights of the day? When were you at your best? When did you feel unrest? And what is one way that you can improve tomorrow? And then you're also monitoring any habits that you have, like working out, themes. And my theme, I'm just going to be very transparent, my theme that I've had for the month of March has been to slow down. And what I mean by that is to slow down in my day-to-day life. It's to slow down and breathe.
There it is.
It's to slow down and breathe.
Yeah.
This morning, I tried to, and I don't know who I'm talking to here, but I wrote down in my Monk Manual last night. It is helping me not just do, but be. That's the whole point, being and doing with this thing. And I wrote down last night, I wanted to work out and I wanted to pray John Eldridge's extended version prayer. So the prayer, the household, he has a household prayer at Wild at Heart, and there's an extended version prayer in there that I love praying over our family about twice a week. And I wrote down that today was the day I was going to do that. And if you follow our newsletter, you'll know that our 2-year-old is waking up when I want to wake up. And so as soon as I'm awake, 5:30 in the morning, 6 o'clock, whatever it is, he's already awake. And so I came down with him. I'm reading him some books. I get him his breakfast. I get myself some coffee. And then all of a sudden, Christy comes down a little bit later on. And I was like, okay, now I can actually go pray this prayer. And so I got my Bible and I went upstairs and I snuck into the bathroom because I thought I could pray the prayer. And I got interrupted, I'm not kidding, 4 to 5 times in that 15, 20-minute prayer time. And I'm going, like, I can feel my nervous system just going, like, I can't slow down.
Yeah.
Because even when I do slow down, I'm getting, Dad, hey, Dad, can you do this for me? Hey, Dad, can you do that for me? Hey, Dad, what about this? Hey, Dad, can you help me with school? Hey, Dad, can you help me with this? Mm-hmm. And I feel just like, And so, that to say, I preface it with this. I feel like I have a really solid rhythm in place, and yet I still feel that in the day-to-day.
Yeah.
I can't imagine what it's like for people who don't have a rhythm in place, or who are not, listen, we're all trying to be as intentional as we can,
Mm-hmm.
and yet we are feeling it if we're raising kids.
Yeah. So that's what we want to talk about first, was the rhythm and this, like, the practical developing a rhythm of life, or Josh, a rule of life, as he mentioned, that actually aids us in a life of like a lifestyle of rest. That's not just like one day. Cause obviously we've talked about that many times, our Sabbath day, and a lot of people have questions about that, and it's great. It's cool to see people wrestle with it, and like, just like we did, like, how does this work? And you push back at first, cause you're like, that's not even like realistic. There's no way that can work. And then it's like the Lord just takes you by the hand and walks you day by day into this new way of living. And so we want to talk about that first, but what Josh just touched on too, where that's what we're going to talk about next week, is this, how the body responds when it can't get rest, or it's basically threatened. Because that's so real, and it's so real for all of us. But there's this, it actually feels unsafe to rest when you find it, because you've been so used to being on guard. So we're going to talk about that piece next week, because we know how real that is, and how it's what we do in a lot of our coaching is you have to unlearn that, and you actually have to heal your nervous system in order to drop into places of rest. But people don't understand that. So they actually get really frustrated with rest because it feels awful at first. And so we want to talk about the ways that we first can implement a lifestyle that walks us into rest. And then next week, it'll be how we actually can experience the benefits of it. Because it's one thing to have time carved out. And then some of you will totally relate to this, like, I don't know what to do. So we just do more, even in that space.
We're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to get practically into what is a day-to-day rule of life, and how do we start setting structure in place to rest, even in the busyness of raising a family. We'll be right back. Hey everybody, Josh Straub here with Famous at Home. I want to introduce you to something if you haven't already seen it. This is our new book, Famous at Home, 7 Decisions to Putting Your Family Center Stage in a World Competing for Your Time, Attention, and Identity. When a couple or a family comes to us and says, hey, Josh, we have a question. What do we do next? We always point to this book. This is our coaching playbook. This is the play-by-play strategies that we use to help families to be famous at home. And so if you have not picked up this book yet, we highly encourage you to get a copy. You can see a link in the show notes. You can click a link right here in the video, and we would love for you to be able to get a copy of this in your hands. If you want to go deeper than the podcast episodes, this is the way to do that. It's our way of walking alongside your family to help you be famous at home. You know, I'm reading a book right now that's really influencing me in my life, and I think it leads into this idea of rest and when we can't rest and what does it look like. And the reason I want to state this, so the book that I'm reading right now is called Radical Hospitality, Benedict's Way of Love. And I just, Lonnie Collins Pratt writes it with Father Daniel Homan. And she takes just Benedict's way of hospitality, looking at opening our hearts, but also opening our homes. And there's a phrase in there that I want to help us, because it's helping me understand rest in a way that doesn't feel condemning or shameful. Because I think so often each of us, we feel like we can't rest, and then when we can't rest, or we do get an opportunity to rest and we don't feel like we can enter it, it just adds more and more shame. So we just keep on the cycle of to do, because it just keeps us, it shoves down the shame that we can't rest, and then we do. And I think it's really important to talk about this, but she talks about in here a spiritual practice. What is a spiritual practice? And in this case, she's talking about the spiritual practice of hospitality, which isn't necessarily, it is related to rest in some respects, but because I think in order for us to be truly hospitable, we have to open our hearts. And in order to open our hearts, we have to come from a place of rest to do that. But She said a spiritual practice is an action intended to make a change or adjustment in the deepest realm of the self. Okay, it's a thing we do that opens a door. Okay, and then I'm just going to jump to this because I think this is the key piece. The spiritual practice puts us into a receiving place where we are open to the something more that we call God. You can set your will to be more open to others, but your heart still has to stretch gradually. And I think the key to that is we can will ourselves, and she's talking about it in relation to hospitality, we can will ourselves to open our hearts to other people, but then you're going to run into people and you're going to be met with conflict. You're going to be met with personalities that don't align with yours. You're going to be met with viewpoints that don't align with yours. And so sure, you can open the spiritual practice of willing yourself to open your heart, but over time, your heart is going to stretch gradually into a place where you see God, even in other people who are different from you. And I want to say the same thing with rest. We can will ourselves into rest, but as we will ourselves into rest, over time, our hearts are going to be stretched more and more where we see God in the rest. And so I just want to encourage this, that you can only will yourself into rest for so long without God's presence, without God's motivating help to get you there. You need to invite God into the practice. You need to ask God for help in the practice so that you can stay motivated to do it. Because for me, when it comes to rest and it comes to my life, I want God's presence to be in absolutely everything that I do. I'm not just having God be in my quiet time, because the reality is that I'm only inviting God into 15 minutes of my life. Like, think about that. We need to invite God into every area of our life, whether we're doing dishes, whether we are sleeping, whether we are playing with our kids, whether I'm interacting with my wife. If I'm not inviting God into those areas of life, I'm reducing him to being a portion of my life that's 15 minutes a day. I don't think that's not what God's presence is about. And so I just want to encourage each of us that true resting in the day-to-day, and we'll get into the how here, I think it requires us to invite God into every area of our lives, not just our rest. And it has to start there, because otherwise we will shame ourselves and we will get ourselves back on the treadmill of the to-do list, and we'll just get irritated and frustrated. And that irritation and frustration will consistently come out on our kids or our spouse, because it's an offense against us that we didn't get our quiet time, that we didn't get our prayer time, that I didn't get space with God. And I think space with God happens even when I'm in relationship with people. But that's something that takes time and stretches my heart over time.
And I think, and just like you're saying, though, I think rest is the same. Like, I think sometimes we're so used to the old way that like we rested, when we were single and we didn't have children and we had all this quiet space and time, and we got alone and probably didn't even like that. So you probably wanted to be around people a lot, but it's just because we had as much alone time as we wanted. And then it almost becomes like a bitter root that starts to get seated in our hearts, where we aren't alone anymore and we don't have space to be alone, or we feel this lack. And I think whenever lack is something, like the survival brain will tell you is like, it's going to kill you because I don't have it. So it actually becomes this panic state where your own body is like fighting for its own survival. Like, so it's going to come out at the people closest to you that are looking like a threat. So even if it's your spouse and your children, they are, I was just working with a couple this week, and, have a new baby. And so sleep is obviously not a plenty, and you're in that survival season, and realizing that their bodies are actually acting like they're dying because they can't get rest. And so it was this, disagreement about like, it wasn't even a disagreement. They had come to an agreement about like, you'll wake up with the baby in the morning, like on a Saturday morning, and I'll wait and I'll do the next day. And then, but you know, someone had woken up not feeling well, being sick. And so it was like called an audible, like, I need you to do this. But then it was like this like freeze of, you can feel the tension start to build in the relationship because both are in survival mode. She is in survival mode. He is in survival mode. Both aren't getting enough sleep. And so to get up with this baby, and obviously they want to, and they want to be, and they're amazing parents and they're so intentional. And yet they're feeling this bitterness toward one another because, and I had them stop and pause, because if you can then go into shame, like what Josh is saying about like, oh, I'm so mad at myself because I shouldn't be taking this out on them. It's not their fault. And that's the rational brain speaking. But if you actually think of what your body is experiencing, your nervous system only knows to protect you. That's its only job. And so it's panicking, being like, you are literally going to die if you don't rest. Like, you have to sleep. So I am going to launch an attack at everything that is causing you to live in this state of survival. Like, you're not doing well and I'm trying to protect you and you're not listening. And so it becomes this, when you feel this almost vitriol, like this bitterness against your spouse or your children, and you're just like, like you're angry at them. That's what's speaking. And if you look at it that way, doesn't that make a ton of sense? Like, of course you would. You're trying to protect yourself. But then we add in this layer of relationship and this desire to also stay connected in relationship and to have healthy relationships and treat people the way we would want to be treated. And then that causes so much confusion because we're overriding our survival brain and trying to put in this, like, I need to keep also safe by making sure my marriage is okay and making sure my husband doesn't hate me or launch an attack at me or my children. And so doesn't that get super confusing and twisted? Like, no wonder this concept of rest is not so simple, because in a lot of this, it becomes about our own survival. And I want to just speak to that piece first, because if you are in a season right now, like they are, like we have been, where you have young children and you are not what feels like, and that's why we wanted to approach this one first, when you feels like you can't rest, like there's not time to rest. You don't have the physical capability of rest. We want to speak to that first, because that is hitting on a actual, like, necessary piece for your survival. And so it makes sense. And I want you to hear that first. You make sense. It makes sense that you feel not just exhausted physically, like, sure, you're tired. And I'm not minimizing that. Like, you are really tired. And I want you to hear the grace and the empathy for that, on how hard this season is. And people are like, yeah, it's a season, and it ends, and don't blink, you'll miss it. And that totally just bypasses how difficult this season is. And I think sometimes, like, Josh and I would have to do this with one another, where we would just look at each other and be like, this is really hard right now. And that mutual acknowledgement of, we're not brushing it under the rug. We're not just bulldozing it and just being like, yeah, but we're survivors. Like, we're tough. Yeah, we are. And we know we have that in us. We all do. But sometimes the first thing you need to hear is, like, let's just acknowledge and recognize together how hard this is. Like, we're doing a really hard thing. And sometimes that means we're going to need to cry. And sometimes that means I'm going to break down. And sometimes that means you're going to break down. And sometimes that's going to come out in anger because you don't have any other way of protecting yourself. And all of that chaos of emotion makes sense. And so I want to just bathe everything in this conversation in so much grace that you feel seen and known and understood that what you're doing is really hard. And yet you're persevering, and yet you're continuing. And I just want to say, like, I'm proud of you. I'm proud of me. I'm proud of us that have walked through these really hard seasons of, and that might not necessarily be raising children for you. Maybe you're in a really difficult work season where it's taking a ton from you. But we all will be in those seasons where the self is sacrificed for something else. And so that's when rest feels far away. And that feels really scary because your sweet body is trying everything it can to bring some balance back.
Yeah. And I think the key to that is we all begin then. So we go from, as Christy was saying, single to having all this rest to all of a sudden getting married and having more rest, but then having babies. And when you have babies, then all of a sudden you hit that season of survival. And the danger is that you end up continuing that survival years into the childhood years, the elementary years, and so on and so forth. And so that you learn to not rest anymore. And so the thing that I just really want to talk about and I think get practical with today is, how do you reintroduce rest in the day-to-day? What does that look like? How can we do that? And I genuinely think, and I'm going to go to what Christy said. So first of all, I think Christy's dead on. We have to have permission that it's okay, that and have this conversation in grace. I think number two, and I'm going to get as simple and as basic as possible here. And those of you who are in the infant years are going to be like, you're a jokester right now, but it's got to prioritize sleep. I mean, rest has to prioritize sleep. Our physical bodies cannot rest without sleep. And so even if you are in those infant years, talking about who's going to take the baby when and that type of thing. If you are married, if you're a single parent, I'm just encouraging you to be okay to ask for help. I think a lot of times what we end up doing is we fail to ask for help and, ask for people to come and watch and help you so that you can get some sleep and get some rest from time to time. Because the sleep thing is everything. Our bodies need 7 to 8 hours of sleep a night, and you will see an absolute difference in your body. And I'm talking to families probably right now who aren't in the infant years. I'm talking to families, your kids are in their elementary years. You've got them raised a bit. But, and they are sleeping through the night, but you're not, because you're up watching Netflix or you're up watching television or you're doing something that's keeping you awake longer than you need to be. And then you wake up in the morning and you're feeling like, oh my gosh, I didn't get enough sleep last night, or your body's just not feeling totally on and you're dragging through the day. I think it's important to get the sleep. The second component of this, I want to go back to Genesis chapter 1, is that God ended every single day by saying it is good. And I think one thing that we fail to do is we fail to acknowledge the good and celebrate the good that happened in our day, the good that we created. What did your words create today? How did you encourage somebody? How did you see that manifest itself? What did you create at work? What did you create with your work? What did your kids create at school or in their school work? What did their words create in kindness with other friends? We've got to be able to celebrate the good at the end of every day. And I encourage you to use dinner time or bedtime with your spouse or your kids to be able to have conversation around what was good and what is good going on. This is the beginning of entering into rest, is to begin to see the world around you, to see your day to day around you differently than I didn't have enough time, I didn't get enough sleep, I was interrupted too many times, because that is going to create neural pathways in your brain that tell your nervous system that you're not resting or you don't have the ability to rest. Your life is just behind. You're falling behind. There's not enough time. Things aren't good. And that just leads to further and further inability to be able to rest. And so there are basics that really, really are important. And I'm also no nutritionist, but I will say too, you have to be careful what you're eating and what you're putting into your body so that you're eating the right nutrients and getting the right foods to also help your body feel healthy.
Okay. And amen. And just everything you said, I just want to point out all the reasons you said, it's all lack and fear. So when you go to bed or if you just live in a state of lack and fear thinking, so basically the nervous system is a toddler. Think of it as like a 2-year-old. It believes everything you tell it, everything. So if all it hears is there's not enough time, I'm not getting enough sleep, things are bad. Like what were your other examples? If that's what it hears, that's what it believes. That's all it knows. And so it is going to act like there is imminent threat coming at it, not just right now, all the time, until you tell it something different.
Your body can't discern the difference between what's real and what's perceived
Yes.
when you have an anxiety or fear in your body, in your brain.
So when you're worried about something, and a lot of you probably know this, but when you're worried about something, you're thinking through the worst case scenario, and I'm saying this so gently because you're an Enneagram 6, and that's how you think. They go worst case scenario thinking, and I'm married to one. And although I don't feel like you do this nearly so much anymore, but if that is where your brain goes, that is how your body acts. Your body acts like it's happening in real time. So when you start to feel that rush, you feel like maybe a pit in your stomach, you feel the rush of heat through your body. That is your body responding. It is ready to fight now. This is where autoimmune conditions can begin. This is because the body is in fight mode all the time because it is perceiving threat all the time. And this is getting a little bit into what we're going to talk about next week of this is why you can't rest. Of course you can't. Your body is primed to fight right now. And so to go to bed and to do I don't do the monk manual. Josh just started it, but it's like I've sort of done a similar thing where before I go to bed and when I first wake up in the morning, it's not just setting my mind right with the Lord, but it's thanking Him. It's why people talk about gratitude practices. That's why it matters so much because it actually changes the state of the brain into one of gratitude. And when you're talking about the very beginning, opening, like that opening and reception to being open to receive God and also what God wants to do, as opposed to this, I have to muscle through and not only protect myself, but also provide for myself today. It's an entirely different way of being. So when people talk about gratitude, that's no small thing. When Josh is talking about the practicality of going to bed and thanking God for what He did today, and also opening yourself up to I'm expectant for what you're going to do tomorrow, it actually drops you out of a fight or flight thinking and into a rest and replenish. And if you're not able to drop into that, and we're going to talk about that next week, that you can't rest. You might sleep. Your body might get some sleep, but you're not actually resting.
Yeah, and I want to talk about, and we'll talk some about this too next week, but just Sabbath day. What does Sabbath day look like? Because, I get this question a lot. Well, what do you guys do? And how do you actually rest on a Sabbath day? And it leads to some of the more practicals of the day-to-day, even for now, that I just want to share. I just think it's, and what I want you to do is I want you to think about what is the one, what are the one, or what is the one, or what are the two ways, get my grammar correct, what is the one, or what are the two ways that you're listening today and you're going, I think that if I just implemented that one thing, that I think that would help me in my day-to-day. Because that's what I have done. And we talk about this in the Famous at Home book. The very first decision to being famous at home is showing up as the best version of you for your loved ones. And the way to do that is to find what is one new way that I can show up as a better version of me. And I'm telling you, I just didn't wake up one day and go, okay, I am going to pray these prayers. I am going to turn my phone into a dummy phone. I am going to work out at 5:30 every morning. I am going to eat healthy. I'm going to get 8 hours of sleep. I am going to do Lectio 365. I'm going to do pray as you go. I didn't wake up one day and implement all of those strategies into my life.
Right.
I implemented one of those strategies at a time over the course of the last number of years. And so that's what I'm saying. I don't want to shame or condemn or you listen to this and feel overwhelmed. I don't even know where to begin. I just want to throw out a bunch of different strategies because I think everybody's different. I think God speaks to each of us uniquely. And I think He wants to, I love this in Psalm chapter 73. It says, my flesh and my heart may fail, but God is the strength of my heart, my portion forever. Then in verse 28, it says, but as for me, God's presence is my good.
Hmm.
God's presence is my good. I have made the Lord my refuge, so I can tell about all you do. God's presence is my good. I want to help you find a way in your life to bring God's presence more into your life so that at the end of the day, when you say it is good because I've experienced God's presence today.
Good.
That can be through working out. That can be through prayer. That can be through any of these number of things. But find that one thing for you. That might be setting your alarm to wake up at 5 or 5:30 or 6 or whatever that time is for you. And you're like, oh my gosh, who's up at that ungodly hour? Listen, if you set your alarm early, what it does is it forces you to go to bed early. Then all of a sudden, there's a flip on the other side where we, for a lot of years, would have TV shows we would watch. I don't think we've had a TV show, and I don't even know how long. Because
we watch The Chosen.
We watch about 15 minutes of it, and then we fall
so
asleep
true. 100%.
after the kids are in bed
100%.
by like 8:30.
We're still trying to finish that last episode.
And so it's fascinating to me
funny.
how your body will respond to, and all of a sudden these other habits will start to come into shape and take form and take shape in your life. And I'm just telling you, it's fascinating to me how that stuff starts to happen. And you make room for God. You make room for his presence, because all of the distractions, we live in an age of distraction.
Yeah.
And I think all of the distractions, if you just get one distraction out, it starts to snowball into all the other distractions that start to just get pushed out over time. And that's where I would encourage you to begin. And so we'll put some links in the show notes. We've talked about these things before, but Pray As You Go app is about a 10 to 15 minute prayer app in the morning that we use. We use Lectio 365 as a way to slow down. And then the Pause app, John Eldridge has a Pause app that I use as well. I would encourage you to take a look at some of those. I'm not saying those would work for you, but I think it's worth a try to see what will help you enter into the presence of God even more each and every day. So those are some of the ones that I would encourage you to do, to enter into. I also do a daily lectionary. So I will you'll see, you can look it up online. There's a daily lectionary where you get an Old Testament reading, a New Testament reading, a gospel reading, and a Psalms. And I'll do that from time to time. Again, I don't do it every day. I switch every day up. I make every day look a little bit different, but it's a mixture of, it's a mixture of intercessory prayer. It's a mixture of getting in the Word deeply. It's a mixture of listening to a Lectio app. There's a mixture there. It's a smorgasbord, if you will. But every day I'm doing something to keep God at the forefront of my heart and my mind. And I think for me, that's one of the just practical ways that I would encourage you to enter into rest.
Okay, I can't shake this, so I'm going to say it. I don't know who this is for, but this is going to go back to the beginning we're talking about in that infant season. If you are a parent that is in that season right now, specifically to mothers, if you are struggling with the nursing, bottle feeding battle, and if nursing's been really hard, that's part of my story. I was just going through this with a friend recently, but I cannot shake saying this. So I feel like I know someone needs to hear this. For us, part of that decision making was we had to sleep. Like, we were up. We had a baby who cried and would scream every 43 to 48 minutes through the night. And in order to survive, we had to trade off nights so that one of us could at least sleep through the night. We put a bed in her room and we would sleep. That person would be on. We would sleep with her. We would get up and feed her and go back for our 30 minutes of sleep and wake up again. But the other person got to sleep through the night. And the only way we could do that is if we were bottle feeding her. And so, and we needed that. I don't know that I would be here. And there is absolutely no shame in that. And people say fed is best, but I just want you to hear even more so. The family at peace is best. Peace is a currency in your home. And I think it's valuable, like infinitely valuable, more so than a lot of the other things we've been trained to believe. So I just say that I could not shake it. So I needed to say that for someone. And I just pray that that sets you free to raise your children in the way that God has for you. And I think sometimes it takes a very early divergence from the normal path to start to set something new in your family. You're not going to look like everyone else just because everyone else says, or even the experts say this is best. Listen to what God says and be led by his peace.
It's a good word. Next week, we're going to talk about entering into what happens for Sabbath. You have an actual day of rest. What happens when you go on spring break and you actually have rest, but you don't know what to do with yourself and you don't know how to enter into that rest. We'll talk about that next week. Until then, go get the 10 days of the Easter story and keep in mind that the greatest red carpet you'll walk is through your front door.
Keep being famous at home.